Welcome back to Light Talk, where the paranormal and the supernatural is a part of our everyday lives. I have a great guest for you tonight, and I'm excited to get started with it. So here we go, and we'll hand the mic over to you. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dana. You asked me to introduce myself. I'm Mark Anthony, JD, Psychic Explorer. Now, people say, well, what does that mean? JD is my law degree, Juris Doctorate, and the media likes to give me different labels. They used to call me the psychic lawyer. Then, due to my work with archaeology, ancient mysteries, philosophy, quantum physics, near-death experiences, paranormal investigation, other media outlets started calling me the psychic Indiana Jones, which I thought was cool, but you don't want to use that because that's a copyright infringement. And I respect George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and now that Disney owns it, you don't want to tangle with them. And love you, by the way, Disney. So my team put together Mark Anthony, JD, Psychic Explorer. That puts it all together. I'm a fourth generation psychic medium. These abilities run on both sides of my family, meaning I can communicate with spirits, as did my parents. And I've tracked this back into the 1890s on both sides of the family. I've traveled the world studying mystical, supernatural phenomenon, sacred sites. I work with the International Association for Near-Death Studies, the Omega Institute, Edgar Cayce Association for Research and Enlightenment, and I could go on and on, but that's just a drop in the bucket of what I do.
Well, awesome. That's a lot of stuff you have experienced. You
Yeah,
are,
and for the benefit of the listeners, I'm the author of three books: Never Letting Go, Evidence of Eternity, and my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency. I also write for Best Holistic Life magazine. If you want to find out about my books, how to get a reading with me, upcoming events online and in person, kindly visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, just like my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency. So, Dana, I'll hand the mic back to you now.
yeah, I mean, that's a lot of experiences, a lot of everywhere. Um, let's kind of get started. So you have four generations of this on both sides.
Yes.
So you were, I'm going to assume, which I shouldn't, but I'm going to assume that you were born knowing things. So how far back do you remember? I know one person that
Oh.
remembers being in the mother's womb. How far back do you
Yeah, I
remember?
remember pretty far back. I actually remember. I'll tell you, my first memory. I had to be maybe a year old. And I remember this. I was sitting in a high chair and I was banging, you had the high chair and you had the little, plate desk thing in front of you. And I was banging on it. And my parents, they were both in front of me, leaning over like that, their hands on they were standing up like this, telling me how much they loved me. We love you. We love you. That's my first memory. And gosh, I can't really think of a better memory than that. And I had a great relationship with my parents. They both had these abilities. My dad had been a U.S. Navy SEAL, and then after the Navy, he became an aerospace engineer. Yet he could see and hear dead people. And my mother was a commercial illustrator and artist. She was in fashion design and advertising. And by the time I came along, she was heavily in the role of full-time mom and homemaker. And she had the mother lode of psychic abilities. And there are people on both sides of the family that I've tracked back into the 1890s that were able to perceive spirits and anticipate future events. And when I was about 3.5 years old, Dana, I started interacting with my invisible friends. And I remember my parents' reactions were very different. Mom was like, "Oh, he's got it." And dad was like, "Oh, geez, he's got it."
So did your dad want to have this, or was this just something he had and just kind of happened for him?
Well, my dad's ability was very complicated. Um, he came from Pennsylvania, and that side of the family, they were very conservative, Northern Baptists. Um, and in fact, one of my great grandfathers had founded a church in his hometown in Pennsylvania. And my dad had four siblings, three sisters and a brother, and one of his sisters, Marjorie, had these abilities as well, as did his mother, Isabel, and her mother, Grace. And it was kept very quiet and clandestine. Um, his mother and grandmother used to have the ladies over on Thursday afternoons for tea and bridge. Well, he was listening one time when he was a teenager and he heard what was going on. They were doing readings, and he was like, "Oh my gosh!" But about that time, he was very clairaudient. But then when he was in the Navy, um, before they would go into combat, he would see this black outline around some of the Marines and some of his fellow sailors, and that meant they were going to die, and they did. And so Dad was not thrilled with his ability because he was able to see essentially the aura of death. Now, he started the Navy as a teenager, and who do you talk to about this? He said, I couldn't go to the skipper and go, "Hey, Skip, I know when people are going to die because I see this." He goes, "They end up in the brig or the mental ward." Um, and so he was kind of fearful of it. Whereas my mother, she was really, really open about it. And what happened, Dana, was after the Navy, my dad was at a dance. I think it was like a USO dance. And he said, here he is, he's like a 22, 23-year-old, full of himself sailor. And he said, "I saw this foxy looking dame." He's talking about my mom. Well, mom, no, he was 20, 22, and I think she was 19, and he thought she was maybe 30. And the reason for that is she worked in fashion and at a high-end department store, so she got all the designer clothes for wholesale. So mom used to dress to the nines. So he's like, "Here's this, really classy dame." And they were both great ballroom dancers. And she was a good Italian Catholic girl. And so, on their third, they met at a couple dances, and she said to him, and my mother's name was Jean, but everyone called her Jeannie. And she said, and my dad's name was Earl. She said, "Before we keep dating, there's something you need to know about me." He goes, "Yeah." She said, "I see spirits." And Dad replied as only a sailor could, with a number of colorful metaphors, followed by, "I do too." And then they were like, "Oh." So they were connecting not just on, it's funny, when I was looking at pictures of my parents when they were young, we don't tend to think of our parents as beautiful people. We think of them as mom and dad. And, after they passed and, we were getting ready for their celebrations of life, and I was looking at pictures of mom and dad. I mean, God, they were beautiful people. I mean, my mom had that hourglass figure that was so desirable. And dad, I mean, you ever seen an ugly Navy SEAL? I was looking at my parents going, "Oh my God," my parents were like really something. But they realized that their connection was more than just on the surface. And for those of us who study psychic phenomena, and I know that you have these abilities, there probably are other people in your family that have these. And it appears to run in families. It doesn't mean that, everybody can have a psychic or mediumistic experience. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's a psychic or a medium. In other words, we can all swim, but it doesn't mean we're all going to be Olympic swimmers. We're all just good at different things, but it's what's known as a recessive genetic trait. And a recessive genetic trait skips, a generation or two. A dominant trait, pretty much everybody in the family has. In other words, It's genetic whether or not you're going to be left-handed or right-handed. All right, 90% of the people in the world are right-handed, so that is a dominant genetic trait. Left-handedness is a recessive trait. But when you get two parents with the same recessive genetic trait, it increases substantially the likelihood one of their children is going to also have that trait, and that was me.
And no, excuse me, no other siblings have it.
I have an older brother and sister, and they're not mediums. They're sensitive to the presence of spirits, and they have precognitive abilities. In other words, they are really good at anticipating future events.
Yeah, I have a sister that's able to do that. I have a brother that's a medium.
There
I
you go. See?
yeah, yeah. And my other sister,
Case in point.
yeah, exactly. My other sister, she's had a lot of experiences too, hearing things in their house, seeing ghosts, um, things like that. So yeah, all of us kids have a little something. And my dad even once in a while will feel my um feel my mom around, but he doesn't believe in this, but he feels my mom hanging around sometimes. So I think it's really kind of cute.
I bet
Believe, but yet
deep
they're here.
down, I bet deep down he really does believe it. It's just that people tend to be afraid of this, and the fear
Mhm.
creates a barrier. And I think overall, women tend to be more accepting of spiritual phenomenon than men. I remember when I was first started doing public events, there'd be like 90% women, and the guys that were there, usually their wives or girlfriends had dragged them there. Now I see about 30 to 40% and even more of men. Also, because of what I do in my work and what I write about in my books, is I try to bridge the divide between faith and science, and I explain a psychic phenomenon and mediumship through quantum physics and human physiology. In other words, this isn't hocus pocus or magic. There are sound scientific principles which explain how this is possible. And that appeals to men because once you start giving guys rational, logical, scientific basis, they'll accept it. Whereas women, I think, are much better at embracing their emotions and tend to be more open to the spiritual. It's just been my experience.
I see that because I've kind of wondered and kind of seen that it seems to be more females within this area, the metaphysical side, than the men. So yeah, I can kind of see there's something. Even my husband is kind of like on that. Well, where's the science? But there are some things he has witnessed, and he's like, I don't know. I don't know what that could be. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So tell us some of your experiences. What kinds of things have you experienced in the different areas that you've worked? I mean, you've been in every area. So um
Well, what would
uh,
you like? Maybe that's kind of an open-ended question. So
there
let's see if we
yeah.
can narrow. See, I'm being the lawyer now. Let's narrow the focus here, Dana, because people say, "Well, tell us about yourself," and it's like, it's always. I don't want to like me. I don't like necessarily talking so much about that unless I'm illustrating the point of a concept I'm trying to explain. So, what type of experiences would you like to talk about?
let's let's start with being a lawyer. So as being a lawyer, how has your psychic abilities intervened with being a lawyer? Is there something that kind of around that you're like, this guy is absolutely guilty or this guy is completely innocent? So how do you bring that together?
Well, first off, well, thank you for asking. I've tried over 100 jury trials. I was a prosecutor. I was a criminal defense lawyer. Then I went into complex civil litigation. So I've represented thousands of people. And for the benefit of all the listeners, I am no longer practicing law. I still appear on shows as a legal commentator and analyst, especially when the paranormal and the supernatural collide. And that actually does happen more than one might think. Because the reason I'm saying that is people always contact me because they want me to file a lawsuit against somebody beaming transmissions into their head, or they think the government is out to get them, or blah blah blah. And it's like, while I appreciate, what you may be going through, I'm not taking law clients. Okay, so I just want to state that. But when I was practicing law, uh, I did have a bit of a reputation of being kind of weird. And I remember other attorneys going, watch out for that guy. He seems to know things other people don't. And I think when I was a young prosecutor, uh, on weekends, you get assigned to doing first appearances. In other words, when people get arrested, they have to be brought before a judge within 24 hours so that the judge can determine whether or not they should be released, and if not released, should bail, should the judge order a bond bail, and if so, how much? And so at first appearances, they bring people in that had been arrested the night before. And here I am, a young prosecutor, and I'd be with a co-counsel. And then there's another table next to us, and that's where the defense would sit. There's always a public defender there for people who couldn't afford an attorney. And occasionally private attorneys would come in to represent clients that had been arrested. And I would look at the people and I would say to my co-counsel, drunk driver, drug dealer, child molester, wife beater, thief. And he's like, how can you tell? And the co-counsel would be looking at the files and goes, Mark, you're right about everything. And he goes, how? Because people that have been in the drunk tank all night, they all look rough, okay? Nobody's got a sign saying drug dealer, drug dealer. So it got to be a game before they would hand me the police report. They'd ask me, what do you think he's. And I would do this and they look at the report. Now, they had like 90+%. And so this reputation started getting around. Then during jury selection, all right, so now in trial, jury selection is Dana, is the part of the trial prior to we start calling witnesses and taking evidence. A jury selection is where a pool of prospective jurors is brought into the courtroom, and both the plaintiff, if it's civil, and the defense, if it's civil, or prosecution, if it's criminal, or and defense, each get to ask the prospective jurors questions to determine if they have any preconceived notions or biases, okay? Because the objective, it's called voir dire, that part of the trial, which is a French term meaning to speak the truth. And the point is to end up with as fair and impartial a jury as possible. Well, I had gone over to the defense, which my friends from the prosecutor's office said that I went to the dark side of the force, okay? But people that are arrested deserve a defense. By our Constitution, they are guaranteed a defense. And because I was defending people accused of crimes, that doesn't mean I personally condoned their behavior. My job as a defense attorney is to make sure that their constitutional rights are protected. Long story short, I was representing this big bruiser, and he'd gotten into a fight at a bar with this other guy, and he beat the daylights out of him. Okay, so it was two big bruisers got in a fight, and the victim, who was the prosecution star witness, was the loser of the fight, so he pressed charges against my guy. So it's a crime of violence, okay? It's not like this was the one barroom brawl for the whole year that made it to the court system. I mean, that happens like, every day, something like that's going on. But it was a crime of violence. So while the prosecutor was asking prospective jurors questions, I kept getting this sensation where I was drawn to this one juror. And I was getting this tingly sensation that I get around the back of my neck and my trapezius, that when a spirit's around, and I kept feeling a feminine energy associated with this one juror. and I kept feeling this clamping sensation around my neck and difficulty breathing. Well, clearly, this was not the appropriate time to be having spirit communication during voir dire at the opening of a trial. And I'll never forget this woman. She had this beautiful olive complexion, these big dark eyes. She was the sweetest person. So now it's my turn to ask the questions. And I stand up, and one of the standard things that you ask prospective jurors in a crime of violence is, has anyone here on the jury, have you or has any family member ever been the victim of a violent crime? Well, lo and behold, Dana, she starts trembling. Tears start rolling down her cheeks, and she raised her hand and she said, "A year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when she was strangled to death by an escaped mental patient who dismembered her body and threw her in a garbage can like she was trash." You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. And I'm standing there, and all I'm thinking is, in law school, they didn't teach me how to deal with this. And then I can hear my client going, "Dude, what are you doing?" And then I could see the image of her sister forming, and that's why I was feeling the clamping around my throat. I literally had a foot in both worlds. And if everyone wants to find out what happened, you're going to have to get my book, Never Letting Go.
Yes, yes. And you know what? This is the book, Never Letting Go.
Never Letting Go. Yeah.
If my camera will take it. There we go.
I love your virtual
Yeah.
background, the way the alien keeps popping up.
He's my friend. I now have a name for him. This is Eugene. But yeah, he likes to hang around with me. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, so that yeah, that was it's a good book. And it's been a while since I've read it, but actually I when I got a hold of Mark, everyone, I was going through some books and I was like, oh, what books here, what books there? And I was looking at them and I was like, wait, this name sounds very familiar. And I'm like, wait, be interviewing him here soon. So I've had this book for a while before even getting in
Well,
touch
thank
with you.
you.
So yeah,
Yeah,
so
well,
that
I
was
wrote Never
pretty
Letting
cool.
Go. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, you're
I
fine.
wrote Never Letting Go to help people that are in that shock of the death of a loved one. You see, the great Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about the 5 stages of grief, and she's absolutely right about that. But there's also 2 phases of grief. And the first phase is shock. And that's right when it happens. And that's where you get that caving in feeling in your chest and your stomach. You can't eat, you can't sleep, and you feel like you're outside of your body. You're just sort of wandering through this nightmare twilight world. And the thing about shock is it will fade after maybe 2, 3 weeks, maybe a month, but then trauma sets in. And trauma is no picnic either. That is the pain and the agony that we live with. And the reason I wrote Never Letting Go is to help people through that. It's a guide on the journey through grief. It's inspirational with messages of love and hope from the other side. It teaches people how to recognize when spirits are around, and it has a very healing component. And I was very honored, Dana, that Never Letting Go has become endorsed and recommended by hospices and grief counselors all over the world. I mean, it was like, I was so honored about that. And when I was on the Never Letting Go book promotion tour, I was with my manager, Rocky. She travels with me, and she schedules speaking engagements. And people kept asking me questions like, "Well, do animals have souls? What happens to people when they die by suicide? Is God real? Is heaven real? Is reincarnation real?" And so I started keeping a list of those questions. And that became the basis for my second book, which was Evidence of Eternity. And in Evidence of Eternity, I began to introduce new terminology to lift mediumship out of the Victorian era. A lot of the terminology and understanding of mediumship was coined during the age of spiritualism, which was like the mid 1800s, right up into about the 1920s, 1930s. And in my opinion, and not just me but other mediums, it was kind of antiquated, or rather was very antiquated. So I started explaining through physiology and quantum physics how this works. Well, Evidence of Eternity, and I was so humbled when it became a major spiritual bestseller. People wanted more of the science, and that led me to writing the Afterlife Frequency. And so, because people want to know, is this real? And it is not hocus pocus. It is not magic. There are sound scientific principles how all of this is real. And that's what I do in my work and in the lectures that I give, and is to help people understand that life continues beyond the physical, and that we can communicate with our loved ones who have passed.
Yes. And I've been having some communication with my mom. Um, she comes through every once in a while in my dreams, and or I'll
Yeah.
smell her or something, And I think it's fantastic. I when I got into all of this, I really got a change of mind of how I feel towards death, and not death, the relocation of your family members, is it's just a whole different viewpoint for me now. I'm more proud and happy for these people that passed and
Well,
sad.
sure.
It's really weird, but I may sound like I'm like how rude for some people, but I'm joyous for those people. I'm sad for the human side of it, but I'm very joyous for them because they're where they're supposed to be. And
Well, and we
it's
all will be.
happy. Yeah.
A dear friend of mine, her name is Rhonda Schwartz, and she's a medium, and she is also the spouse of Dr. Gary Schwartz, who is professor emeritus of the University of Arizona, the Laboratory for Advanced Health and Consciousness. And Dr. Schwartz is working on technology to communicate with the afterlife. It's called the soul phone. Really interesting stuff. And Rhonda said something which I believe is so profound. She said, "We have one life, and it's eternal." And it's just so succinct and so on point, because this material body is just part of our existence, just a drop in this eternal sea. And so we come in and out of the material world. And we all are going to do this. And, and as when we're younger, unless you're afflicted with some type of serious illness or you have family members die, when you're in your teens and your 20s, you think you're going to live forever and that you're invulnerable. And then as you gain life experience in a more mature perspective, you begin to face your own mortality. And even those of us who know that life continues beyond the physical, it's still a little bit scary, about the idea of dying. Not so much for dying, it's more the how part, I think. Because
Yeah.
I know that we're all going to transition to the other side, and I know that once I'm out of this body, I will be connected with this infinite array of people, including so many of my loved ones who are already there.
Right. Right. I agree with you. I'm the same way. And I even know now that by the time you start feeling all the pain or whatever of a dying situation, um, your soul's already gone. So you're not really feeling that. So, I mean, it's like there's no fear anymore. There's no reason to be very fearful of dying because you're not going to feel any pain before, let's say, there's a car accident or something like that. You're going to leave your body before that car really hits. They're going to take care of you.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. And speaking of with my brother, he was so lucky. I shouldn't say lucky. He was meant, but he was in the room when we took our mom off of life support. And he was so intrigued because he was felt to look up in the corner of the room. And when he did, he got to see my mom's tunnel. He
Yeah.
got to see mom walking up in there and turning around and saying, I'm okay. Everything's good. No worries. Turn around and start walking up.
That's
It was
very
really cool.
important. I'm glad you mentioned that because that phenomenon has been reported worldwide for centuries. And now we have a name for it. It's called a shared death experience. And within the field of near death experiences, okay, my electromagnetic soul theory, and I can get into that a little bit later. Our brain is the host of our consciousness, of our soul, that I refer to as the electromagnetic soul because our brain is like a computer hard drive. All right, and the computer hard drive didn't create the programs on it; it merely hosts it. Same thing with your soul. And when you're in the transitional phase, you're sending out EM impulses and emissions, EM meaning electromagnetic. And people around you, their electromagnetic souls start to interface with the person transitioning. And the person who's transitioning sees the light, the tunnel, the loved ones in spirit waiting to greet them. People in close proximity, physical, and it doesn't have to be just family members. It could be hospice workers or other healthcare workers, bystanders. I mean, talk to anyone that works at hospice. They'll tell you about this. Okay. They experience it all the time. And so what happens is you temporarily pick up on what that person's experiencing as they make the transition from the material world to the afterlife frequency. And so a shared death experience occurs when people who are not in imminent danger of dying still temporarily experience the death experience of the person transitioning. And this is a whole new field of study. I mean, it's been reported for thousands of years, but it's been more concentrated in the past like 20 years. Dr. Raymond Moody, who is he's a friend and colleague, and I'm so honored to know him. He is the researcher, the doctor who introduced the term near death experience, and also I believe shared death experience. So when people, anybody here who is at the bedside of a loved one who's dying, and you see this flash of light, or you see or feel spirits around, or you feel kind of like lifted off your feet for a second, and you're thinking, well, that's my imagination. Oh, no, it isn't. You're actually getting caught up in the electromagnetic frequency of somebody making a quantum leap from our dimension to another dimension. And it is really amazing.
Yeah, the way my brother explained it is just phenomenal. It's just beautiful. And I'm getting this even sharper when each time I talk about it. I feel like that image is getting sharper and sharper, like I'm getting a more visual of what happened. And it's just absolutely beautiful. Absolutely. So, is there a possibility of the bystander actually moving up with them for like almost like a near death with them, but
Well,
just
that's exactly what
is
a
that,
shared death experience
or so they
is
actually go,
your
okay,
your frequency is your brainwave frequency is overlapping with the electromagnetic soul of the person that of the person of the soul that's leaving that person's body. So that's what's happening. That's why they see it.
Okay. Okay.
And
Awesome.
that's explained in detail in my book, The Afterlife Frequency. I go into great detail about shared death experiences. Um, Deathbed visions and shared death experiences tend to overlap. A deathbed vision is when somebody who is declining and dying, they will start talking about, oh, there's my, my mother or my Aunt Agnes or whatever. They'll start talking about seeing spirits, and people in close proximity may start to see them too. And then the deathbed vision becomes a shared death experience as the person actually begins to transition, meaning they're dying, and the people in close proximity, like your brother, will get a snippet of going into the tunnel, into the light. But they're not going to die. That's what I was explaining before. People who are not in imminent danger of dying will share temporarily the experience of the person who's transitioning.
Wow. That is so cool.
It
That
really
is.
is. I mean, it's still heart wrenching to see somebody that you love die, but then it's like, wait a second, I just saw their light, their energy go into this brighter light. To me, that's
Yeah.
very comforting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really cool. I think it's just something that was my mom meant for my brother to see. And I think it was just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Wow. Ooh, let's go into your mediumship. I mean, what kinds of experiences have you had with your being a medium and maybe some joyful times or maybe some more of your
All right,
okay times?
I'll tell you a fun story. All right, here's a fun
Yay.
story. Okay, um, you know who Shirley MacLaine is, right?
Yes.
Okay, for those of you who don't know, you should know Shirley MacLaine, iconic actress, Academy Award winning, and she's still working. Shirley is in her 90s and she's still appearing in movies. Well, she was the first major Hollywood figure to go public with her belief in reincarnation, spirit communication, UFOs, and that was back in 1983, 84, 85, right on 1986. And she wrote this book called Out on a Limb because she was literally going out on a limb. Well, she's become a metaphysical icon in addition to being one of the greatest actresses in film history. Well, about seven, no, actually 8 years ago, I was invited to speak at the Lilydale Assembly, which is a spiritualist community in upper state New York. So we're in our hotel in Buffalo, and my manager Rocky's on the phone. She goes, "When? What? Now?" She goes, "Mark." I said, "What?" She goes, "I have Shirley MacLaine's assistant on the phone, and Shirley wants to interview you on her radio show, Independent Expressions." And I said, "When?" She goes, "Now." I go, "Now?" And so Rocky hands me the phone and they go, "Stand by for Miss MacLaine." And all of a sudden there's Shirley MacLaine on the phone. She goes, "Hello, this is Shirley MacLaine." She has this really great Hollywood voice because in her era, they used to teach women. They called it a mid-Atlantic accent, meaning it was like part British, part American. And it was like somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. And I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. Well, we were supposed to be on the phone for 20 minutes, but Shirley said, "Mark, I'm so enjoying talking to you. Do you mind if we go longer?" Well, like I'm going to say no to one of the people I have always looked up to. I read several of her books, and we started talking, and she was asking me all types of questions about spirit communication. And then we we somehow got on the topic of Stephen Hawking. And at the time, Professor Stephen Hawking was alive. And Shirley said, "Well, Stephen's a friend of mine." I go, "He is?" And she goes, "Contrary to popular belief, Stephen does believe in God. but God as an energy, as a, an energy that interconnects us as opposed to, a gnarly guy sitting on a throne smiting people. And she said, so I was in Stephen's office and there were two pictures on the wall behind him. One was Albert Einstein, the other was Marilyn Monroe. And I said, Stephen, I understand Albert Einstein, but why Marilyn Monroe? Okay, Dana, we're on the air. All right, there's a lot of people listening. And she imitates him. She goes, because her curves are more beautiful than a quantum singularity. And I'm cracking up. And I said, oh, did you ever meet Marilyn? She goes, Marilyn was my friend. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, number one, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And then I realized Shirley MacLaine used to be part of the Rat Pack. And the Rat Pack was Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford. Okay. And I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
And she said, yeah, the studios were really nasty to us. She said that because Shirley and I were up for the same parts and they would play us off on each other trying to get this air of competition. She said, but we were friends. And she said, I was there with the Rat Pack the night that Marilyn sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President to John F. Kennedy. And I'm like, oh my God. And she said, but Marilyn was throwing a fit backstage because she said, I'm not wearing that dress, because that was that like almost see-through dress. And one of the producers said, well, that's fine, Marilyn. Shirley MacLaine's here. We'll get her to do it. She's the same size as you. And then Marilyn said, fine, I'll do it. So she goes out and sings that iconic Happy Birthday, Mr. President. All right, you can, if you don't know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, just, YouTube. And I know you know what I'm talking about, Dana, but, we may have
Yeah.
some 20-year-old listeners that don't know about this. And you should, because it's part of history. Well, um, and then Shirley said, things after that for me changed. She got cast in this movie called The Apartment. And The Apartment catapulted Shirley MacLaine from she was a dancer and a real pretty girl, to an A-lister. And she said, so there we were at Grumman's Chinese Theater for the red carpet premiere in Hollywood. And she said, I was so excited. And a limo pulls up and she goes, my friend Marilyn gets out of it. And she said, Marilyn's wearing a full length fur coat. And she said, everyone's like, what's up with Marilyn? It's Hollywood. It's like 100 degrees outside. Why is she wearing a fur coat? And during the movie, Marilyn got up and went out to the lobby to the bar. And Shirley went out, and she's explaining this. All right, we're on air.
Uh-huh.
And Shirley said, so I went up to Marilyn. So, Marilyn, is there at the bar, Marilyn, is there a problem? And she said, Marilyn turned to me and opened her fur coat, and she was stark naked underneath it. And then Shirley MacLaine goes, now that I think of it, Stephen Hawking had a point, about her. So I'm like, oh my God, and like she's telling us this on air. And I said, wow, I wonder what Marilyn would think about this. And she goes, well, you're the medium. You tell me. Talk about pressure. Okay. And I'm like, my heart's pounding. I'm like, okay, namaste. All right. I'm trying to get myself doing deep breathing. And I said, okay, okay.
This visual that you just had.
Yeah, yeah. Between that and Shirley MacLaine is putting me on the spot. We'll connect with Marilyn. And I calmed down and Marilyn came through. And I started describing her.
Oh,
And she
sweet.
goes, yes, that sounds like Marilyn. I said, but she's got a message for you. And what is it? Thank you, Shirley, for taking the high road. Thank you for not doing it. I didn't know what it meant, but then Shirley said, oh, I've wondered about that for the last 50 years. She said, when Marilyn died, the producers of the movie she was working on said, look, Shirley, we'll just cut the scenes with Marilyn out and reshoot them with you. And Shirley said, I am going to take the high road. I'm not going to do that to my friend. And Marilyn gave Spirit of Maryland gave the exact same words that Shirley said to them. And then Shirley said, ask her, was she murdered? All right, so now this is getting really heavy. And the response was, no, I just couldn't take it anymore. She said, I felt so garish and I was so self conscious. She said, everywhere I went, people stared at me and they were judging me. She said, not like you, Shirley. You just glided through a crowd with such elegance. And she said, that makes a lot of sense to me. And then I said, wait a second, there's somebody else coming in. She goes, who is it? I go, oh, she's absolutely beautiful, brunette, incredible complexion, the most beautiful violet, like her eyes are like violet. And I'm like describing her. And then I'm starting to realize, and Shirley goes, oh, Liz. Elizabeth Taylor was my dearest friend. So at this moment, Dana, I realize that I'm doing a reading. I'm talking to Shirley MacLaine while I am communicating with the spirits of Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor. I don't know if I'm ever going to top that one.
Something you'll never forget. Oh, wow.
Never. And it was funny if I can
Mm.
just. So she goes, Mark, this has been so delightful. I said, Miss MacLaine, call me Shirley. Okay, okay. Shirley, can I ask you one question? She goes, anything. I said, did Carly Simon write the song You're So Vain about your brother, Warren Beatty? And she said, I'll never tell, but that
Oh.
is the conventional wisdom. Because
Oh,
that's one of the great mysteries of rock and roll. Who
yes.
is You're So Vain written about? And back in the day, Warren Beatty was Joe Buck. I mean, he was the ladies' man. And so I figured I'll never get this chance again, you know. Although Shirley did want me to come and do a private reading for her, but we were trying to get it scheduled, but she was on a movie and I was on tour, and unfortunately it never worked out. But hey, Shirley, if you're listening, I'm still available.
There you go. Awesome. What that is, wow. Something not many would ever experience.
It was such an honor,
It's
and I've done
so
readings
awesome.
for I've done readings for other very high profile Hollywood celebrities. I've done readings for members of royal families and politicians and billionaires. And I'm not trying to the thing is, it doesn't matter who you are, what you've achieved, how much money you have, fame or success. Death is the great equalizer. We all suffer the loss of a loved one, and it's crushing. It is just, and for people that are really high profile, it makes it difficult because the paparazzi and the media is always trying to stick a microphone in your face and ask you stuff. I mean, it's hard enough coping with the death of somebody that you love more than life itself when you're fending off the media. But then again,
Mhm.
what about the people who don't have that support group, who don't have the friends or the family? And I want to speak just for a moment. The most rewarding and humbling work that I do is for an organization known as Helping Parents Heal. And it was founded by some parents who lost children. And they refer to themselves as shining light parents and their children as shining light children, because the light of the love for your child shines ever brightly in your heart, and the light of your child's soul shines even brighter in eternity. Because they came up with the term, because we have terms like orphan, widow, widower, but what do you call a parent who's lost a child? You say a bereaved parent. No, they change it to shining light parent. And so, for those of you who have lost children, go to helpingparentsheal.org, because it's a nonprofit organization, and that's what we do, is we help people cope with the loss of a loved one. Yes, they incorporate mediumship, but it's also a cross-disciplinary approach with grief counselors. There's branches all over the country. They have online events, because no one should ever have to go through the death of a child alone.
It is very, very difficult. I have firsthand experience with that. Um, I didn't, I lost mine at 6 weeks pregnancy,
Oh,
but but it was very difficult for several years. Um, Never forgot her, never anything,
never
but
will.
I never will. No, I
Never
never
will.
will. She's in my heart. I mean, I've had a fantastic brother that was able to connect us for a few hours, which was flipping amazing. But yeah, it's been very difficult. And the support is very difficult too when family members don't understand what we go through. I mean,
No, they
it
don't.
was very, very hard.
Yeah, people like yourself, you're a shining light mom, okay?
Mhm.
And people around you don't understand. Some people distance themselves from you because they feel awkward. And with helping parents heal, there's people that you'll connect with who do understand, and you can talk as much or as little about it. You don't have to say anything. Maybe sometimes just being around people who understand, attending online events, there's going to be a conference in 2026 in August in Phoenix, and I'm one of the keynote speakers there, and I'll also be doing spirit communication events as well. And we've got a really great group of speakers, mediums, grief experts, who will be addressing. Dr. Gary Schwartz will be there talking about the soul phone, the technology that they're working on. Um, so this will be a really healing event.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm so happy you guys are doing that because I've healed. I'm doing fantastic with it. But I know there's others that are just having a hard time. So thank you guys for doing that. It's a fabulous thing. Thank you. Yeah, pretty awesome. Ooh, we got an hour here up already. It goes so fast. I would love to have you back on the show because I know we haven't even spoke about portion of what you've experienced.
Well, because your
It's
alien
awesome.
friend that keeps popping in, I've got quite a bit to discuss about UFOs. I've done readings for some of the most high-profile abductees on record, so that would
Nice.
be very interesting to be able to share with you and with your audience. But um, I really want to thank you for having me, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Um, it's an honor to be here for you, and it's an honor to work with Dana. So God bless everybody. And if you want to find out about me, scheduling readings, upcoming events, please visit my website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, just like my book, the afterlifefrequency.com.
And we'll put all that information in the notes below so you can check it out there too. So, yeah. Well, thank you for being on the show. And I am excited to have you back to talk about more. So, yeah. So, if anyone else out there has anything you would like to share, email me at lighttalk423@gmail.com. And we will talk with everybody next time. Bye.